What is with this new Final Fantasy? Where's the turn-based gameplay? Where's the silly-haired protagonist? The Tetsuya Nomura threads? The Nobuo Uematsu jams? Where's the fun color palette? M for mature? I love Final Fantasy. Is this thing even a Final Fantasy at all? And most importantly, can you pet the dog? The first Final Fantasy released in 1987, and as you can tell from the US box art, this game was marketed as your typical swords and sorcery fantasy fare. Buff berserkers, bearded wizards, and a medieval-esque setting. But if you look at the gorgeous Japanese box art illustrated by the legend Yoshitaka Amano, who influenced the designs of Final Fantasy for years to come, this is not your typical Western fantasy adventure. Look at this box art. This looks like a poem. This is like if an illustration was a poem. I've never seen a suit of armor that looks like poetry. Are you kidding me? Yeah, sure, gameplay-wise, you're wandering around slaying imps and wargs in a fantasy world. But look at the sprite designs. The presentation is different from the other guys. We've got instantly iconic elements like airships and crystals, musical themes that are going to be referenced across the series. Something about it all just clicked and set off a series that would forever be cemented in the history of video games. 6 mainline games were released in the NES and Super Nintendo era, all taking the Dungeons & Dragons styled influence and injecting its own flair to the genre that set it apart from the crowd. By Final Fantasy VI, we're seeing mechs mingling with high fantasy elements, and it's hard to imagine how this series could possibly keep innovating. If you were born around the time of Blockbusters and Rice Krispie Treat cereal, come back to me. Why did you have to leave? You were the best cereal. You're the best cereal I ever had. Come back. Then you may have started your journey like me with Final Fantasy VII for the PS1. The game that absolutely captivated the world with its story of eco-terrorism, evil corporate empires, and designs that absolutely shattered the ideas of what a JRPG could be. And damn did that set up an expectation for design moving forward. And while Final Fantasy VIII may not have been quite as iconic, it was still a visual breath of fresh air in a sea of medieval-themed RPGs, so much so that when Final Fantasy IX hit, you may have been completely uninterested. What are these cute little characters in the medieval settings? Gross. But you're wrong. This was a love letter to the origins of the Final Fantasy series. This is where it all began. These medieval settings, these cute little characters, Vivi the Black Mage. I mean, come on, that's the Final Fantasy I design brought to the 3D world. And it was a great game, but any games following Final Fantasy VII were up for a tough battle once something that iconic came out. But then, the PS2 drops, and our little peanut brains cannot handle the glory. The PS2 really had us all thinking graphics cannot get better than this. Final Fantasy X comes out and we're getting futuristic cities, ancient religions, Meg Ryan dripped to the nines in a Tetsuya Nomura fit and Karen cut teaching us how to when times are tough, and a heartbreaking story that makes you go, damn it, Dad, I'm good enough. Just kidding. I love my dad, but this is one of those games where as a kid, I would be embarrassed when he walked in the room during the beautifully tender kissing scenes because of that original classic flavored 2001 toxic masculinity that even as a 9-year-old playing a JRPG that was actively shaping me into the dork I am today made me feel like I only had to like things that were badass and definitely not poetic and beautiful and tender and sweet. It wasn't even my dad who made me feel that way. He's like a super cool guy. It was more like my friends and like school and all that sort of stuff, you know. But that's what this game does. It gets you thinking. gets you thinking about this stuff. I love 10, it's not for everyone, but it's an undeniably great game. It's also super linear. You can go back and re-explore areas later, but most areas are just a map limited to a few branching trails, think like a hiking map. Once you've been over those areas a few times, you know them pretty well, and there's not really much new to see. It's just, places to go to grind. Anyways, great game. And if we fast forward a little bit, we have an online main entry in 11, a game set in Rabanastre with a totally new, more active battle system in 12, still not straight action, but we're moving away from turn-based gameplay. 13, which would just take its own video to even discuss. 14, a terrible but then amazing online game. And by the time we got to 15, we've moved from turn-based gameplay to full-on action territory. And we make that transition completely in 16. Shattering the heart-shaped crystals of old head purists the world over. Starting a war between the turn-based Final Fantasy fans, the action-based Final Fantasy fans, and the cowardly fence-sitters who have the nerve to enjoy both styles of gameplay. That me? But seriously, I like both approaches. It offers so much variety to a long-running series that could have gone stale by now, but finds ways to innovate with ever-evolving gameplay and one-of-a-kind environmental designs. So to me, an action-y Final Fantasy sounds appealing. I mean, I bought Strangers of Paradise as soon as it came out, and let me tell you, putting a Dark Souls spin on the Final Fantasy formula created a one-of-a-kind game that if you haven't played, you really need to. I know everyone was obsessed with the chaos stuff, which is hilarious and part of the reason why you should play the game. But if you're a Souls or Final Fantasy fan and you give yourself a chance to bask in its corny goodness, you're gonna discover a damn hidden gem. Anyway, all this to say that both tradition and experimentation are at the heart of the Final Fantasy series. The inclusion of familiar favorites like Moogles, Chocobos, enemy designs, and guys named Sid makes the Final Fantasy franchise feel like home, while ever-evolving gameplay, settings, and protagonists give each game a unique identity. So what is this thing's identity? Honestly, for the first time in my history with Final Fantasy, I didn't really feel that excited when seeing info on this game. The color palette is very limited, I felt like the characters were looking a little generic. I mean, Ifrit is on the cover, so you know it's a Final Fantasy game, but aside from that, I felt like this could be any generic fantasy game just from the cover art alone. But I wanted to keep an open mind because it's Final Fantasy and I love the franchise. I keep a sleeping Chocobo Stuffy in my daughter's crib while reading her Chocobo in the airship. It means a lot to me. So of course, I was gonna give it a chance. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. Before we even crack into anything, I just have to say you can pet the dog, so this is indeed a great game. But there's one thing I'm kind of worried about. This game is rated M, and it has cute chocobos in it. Don't you dare hurt those chickens. I love them. If I see one injured, I will cry. I will do it. Okay, first off, this game is beautiful. Graphically, it's a treat for the eyes. Every attack is a spectacle, and elements like fire and lightning look and feel truly destructive. Tiny environmental details are lovingly crafted, and cutscenes are as cinematic and stunning as ever, in the way we've come to expect from Final Fantasy. I love to look at this game, and there were a few interpretations of our favorite creature and summon designs that hold top spots in my book. Rama is giving less wizened old wizard and more thundering demigod daddy of lightning. And look at this guy here. That's so sick. I love that. That's so cool. I want more. If this is what we can get out of an M-rated Final Fantasy in terms of the design department, sign me up. Final Fantasy has always been known to push graphical boundaries, so it's no surprise that we've got another gorgeous game here. In that regard, this is most definitely a Final Fantasy. Now, the Final Fantasy series historically really knows how to set the stage in terms of the opening of a game, and this game is no different. From music referencing the main Final Fantasy theme, to imagery of giant summons being used as part of a huge war, and the summons are called icons this time around. We're not given much context, but that's fixed pretty quickly as we're thrown into a playable flashback that lays out our MacGuffin and— No! Monsters. I hate you. After the immense pain of the past, we're dropped back into the present situation on the battlefield, with more context and attachment to Clive, the protagonist. And very shortly after that, we meet a main character named Sid, and you know what that means. That's right, that's another point towards this being a Final Fantasy. You're not allowed to have a Final Fantasy without a character named Sid, as per tradition. But these character designs didn't excite me that much at first. Everyone has normal hair and regular looking clothing, so I was a little nervous at first. The writing though, the way these characters come to life, the way they develop and grow, works so well. And eventually I started to realize how these more realistic designs help in grounding the characters and making their emotional growth more human and relatable. We have a serious story, so we're working with more realistic looking characters, and these side characters have some great character growth stories. Better even than Clive's own story, I think. I found myself growing attached to these characters. The drama between Sid, Benedicta, and Kupka is so juicy, and Jill is possibly one of the best written characters in Final Fantasy history, which is no small feat. Ultimately, they don't feel nearly as timeless to me as a Cloud, Squall, Tidus, or even Noctis. But the writing is so strong that I find myself absolutely compelled to see where their stories go. I won't sum up the entire story because I'm not here to spoil, and this is one of those stories with warring kingdoms and long histories, and my brain is just barely complex enough to process Fire Sword cool, and I can't believe they hurt the chicken. This game is worth a playthrough for the twists and turns alone, and Final Fantasy stories have been known to be pretty well written in the past, so in that regard, I'm gonna have to say that's another point for this being a Final Fantasy. Now, Final Fantasy is a series whose music means so much to me. The soundtracks to 7 and 10, composed by the Titan Nobuo Uematsu, contain some of my favorite pieces of music to listen to, with iconic melodies that still ring out in the ears of gamers the world over. So I was eager to see what this game was bringing to the table in terms of composition. I can't say there are too many earworms in terms of new melodic content, but I really appreciate the use of musical themes from Final Fantasy's history book of melodies to set the mood. In particular, we get a lot of references to Final Fantasy's main theme, you know the one from the menus, this guy. That melodic reference pops up a lot in this game, and it does a great job of getting me excited and in that Final Fantasy headspace. They played it at the very beginning of the game, and it got me right there. It got me right to where I wanted to be with a Final Fantasy. It makes me want to hunt some crystals. But outside of those references to previous compositions, the music is perfectly adequate and fitting. All in all, great music, well-composed stuff, just not nearly as memorable as what we've gotten in other games. Is the music Final Fantasy? I'm gonna say yes, since we're paying homage to the melodies of the past, and that can really give us the Final Fantasy flavor. The rest of the music isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. The orchestration is beautiful and fitting and expertly crafted. It's just not what I'll be reaching for on a car ride. Whereas a song like Tifa's theme is so memorable, I play it for my musician family members to be like, you like that beautiful piece of music? Well, it's from a video game, so validate me, haha. I got castles and keeps. We're talking sunless slums, giant effing pizzas, water orbs, flying schools, forget valiant steeds, and basic ass horses. We're riding chickens. You never know what you're gonna get with a Final Fantasy. So with this Final Fantasy, the piece of media I can't stop comparing it to is Game of Thrones. I'm not saying there's a ton of similarities between Game of Thrones and Final Fantasy XVI, but rather this game feels like a Final Fantasy take on a Game of Thrones type story, one filled with interpersonal relationships, family drama, warring kingdoms, political schemes, betrayal, drama, and death. While it's entirely competent in so many ways, it just doesn't bring anything that new to the fantasy genre. It's well made and it's great fantasy, but I've kind of experienced that before. And in some ways, that's where I feel like this game has landed. Is it well made? Incredibly. Is it fun? Undeniably. Is it worth playing? Absolutely. And honestly, I think when this game hits PC, you're gonna hear a lot more talk about it and see some great reviews. I just don't think it has the juice in the same way other mainline Final Fantasy entries do, and that keeps it from being as iconic as its siblings. But not everything needs to be a timeless classic, and not every Final Fantasy game has achieved icon status in the past. Sometimes a game can just be a really fun, great game, and that's way more than okay. Ultimately, I feel like that's what we have here. A really fun, great game. Is it the greatest Final Fantasy in the series? No. Is it the most Kupo? Definitely not. There's only one Moogle. But it is a damn good time, a visual spectacle, and certainly worthy of the Final Fantasy name. I'm really enjoying it, and as a fan of the Final Fantasy series, I think this thing feels perfectly Final Fantasy. It's next-gen Final Fantasy. It's different, but it's good. Thank you guys for watching this video. I really, really appreciate it. It means the world to me. Please like and subscribe if you like what you saw here. I'm really trying to grow my YouTube channel this year, so I'm gonna be putting out lots of great content. If there's anything you'd love for me to review in the world of video games, art, whatever, let me know. So this has been Hellion.Vision, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Till then, take it easy.